He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid?" For just a few moments this morning, I want to raise the very same question Jesus raises in the text. Why are you afraid? In his book, Preaching Through a Storm, the Reverend Dr. H. Beecher Hicks makes the argument that at any given point in our lives, we will all find ourselves in one of the following three predicaments. We are either in a storm, coming out of a storm, and if you do not fit into any one of these categories, I hate to be the bearer of bad news this morning, but you just may be heading in to a storm. I don't know which category you were in this morning, but what I do know is that at some point, everyone will encounter some stormy weather. I don't care who you are. You can be high class, low class, or just don't have no class. No one, not even Jesus, is exempt from experiencing the storms of life. Our text teaches us that when it comes to storms, we have no control over when they come or how they come. We can't control a storm's impact or the amount of damage it will leave behind. But y'all, I have some good news this morning, because when it comes to storms, there is one thing we can control. We can control how we go through them. As I examine the text this morning, it's hard to believe that Jesus and his disciples are in the same boat, experiencing the same storm at the same time. If I were to isolate either one of those responses, many of you would think, oh, they couldn't possibly be in the same storm, on the same boat, at the same time, because their responses are radically different. Jesus, who had been preaching and teaching all day long, is resting. The disciples, I don't know what they were doing, the text doesn't say, but I'm just gonna go ahead and use my sanctified imagination and say they were probably chilling or hanging out and watching Jesus preach and teach all day long. They are stressing. So Jesus is resting and the disciples are, come on and help me with preach this sermon today. Here they are on a boat, headed to the other side, not because they wanted to, not because they needed to, not because it was their idea to, but because Jesus asked them to. You see, Jesus and the disciples were cool. Jesus and the disciples, they were boys. So when Jesus said, "Let's go," without question, the disciples jump on a boat and they what? Go. Everything seemed to be going well. The sun was shining. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, when all of a sudden, without warning, boom, they find themselves in the middle of a windstorm. Now, let me pause parenthetically to say, don't think that just because you and Jesus are cool, that somehow means that you will not encounter stormy weather. As a matter of fact, it's my experience, Anita, that there are some storms you will face just because you and Jesus are cool. That was certainly the case with the disciples. Here they are doing what Jesus told them to do. Somebody say, there are problems that we will find ourselves in because there are some things that we do. And then there are some problems and some challenges that we will find ourselves in just because we are doing what Jesus told us to do. So So they're facing the biggest windstorm of their life. Here they are doing what Jesus told them to do, and now they are facing the biggest windstorm of their life, and they're afraid. They feel the boat rocking. They see the wind blowing. They notice the height of the waves, and they're afraid. They wake Jesus up in a panic and they ask him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Do you hear their question? They have already determined that they were going to perish in this storm. Now we can look upon the disciples with condemnation if we want to. But the truth of the matter is, we are not only like them, we are them. When we encounter storms in our lives, our immediate reaction is to become afraid. We panic, we question Jesus, and we make the determination that the storm we are facing will be the one that will take us out. Am I the only one in here? We feel the winds and we see the waves and we immediately decide, this is it. But I have come to ask you this morning, why are you afraid? As I look at this text, there is only one reason the disciples were afraid. And I submit to you this morning that we are afraid for the very same reason. The disciples forgot. The disciples forgot. They forgot three important things that I want to lift up. First, they forgot what they learned during previous storms. To be fair to the disciples, this was the biggest storm they had encountered. But most of them were experienced fishermen who had encountered storms before. Those storms may not have been as big, but there were some things and some lessons that they learned from those previous storms that could have helped them fight this storm. I believe, church, that everything the disciples needed to fight this storm was already inside them. The experience they gained and the lessons they learned fighting other storms were designed to prepare them for this storm. It's the same thing with us. When we are facing what feels like the biggest storm of our lives, we forget that this isn't our first storm. We have encountered storms before. And there are some lessons. There were some things that we learned when we were fighting those storms in the past that we can now use to fight this storm that we're fighting right now. I just want to take time to talk to somebody who is facing a storm right now. Listen to me very clearly. Everything you need to survive this storm is already inside you. It's already inside you because this isn't your first storm. And there were some things that you picked up along the way that is going to help you to fight this storm. Don't forget what God has already done in your life. Don't forget about all of the ways that God has already saved you in your life. God has already brought you from a mighty long way. And trust me when I tell you, this storm is not going to take you out. Don't forget the lessons that you already learned. Remember, you have gone through storms before, and guess what? Guess what? You survived. You survived. So if you have survived in the past, you can certainly survive right now. Just think back over your life and remember what you learned. Some of us went through storms 10 years ago, and we realized that prayer works. We didn't know it before, but after going through it, we realized that God still answers prayers. Some of us went through storms, and we realized I can sing my way through this. All I have to do is focus on God, and He will work everything out for my good. Some of us went through storms. We didn't have anything to our name. We thought we were going to be taken out a long time ago, but then we realized that God is Jehovah Jireh, and that God will provide for our every need. We learned that. So now that we're facing this storm, hold on to those lessons. Remember that prayer can get you out. Remember that God is your provider. Remember that God is your healer. Remember that God can give you peace even in the midst of the storm. You know that because God has done it for you already. The disciples were afraid because they forgot what they learned when they fought those other storms. But they were also afraid because they forgot who was on the boat. From the disciples' perspective, it felt as if Jesus had left them alone. It felt like they were fighting this storm all by themselves. Here they are, Karen, fighting the biggest storm of their lives. Just get that image in your mind. They're on a boat. The waves are just rocking. It's raining and it's pouring. They can't see. They're trying to do everything they can to get out of this storm. I'm sure it was chaotic. They were wet. They were cold. They were running around each other, bumping into each other. Here they are trying to do everything they know how to do. And when they look up, instead of seeing Jesus fighting the storm with them, they see Jesus sleeping, not at all concerned about what they're going through. I can imagine the rage, the anger, the frustration. I can imagine how hurt they must have felt, how betrayed and abandoned. These disciples left everything behind to follow Jesus. Say what you want to say, but they were the first ride or die. Because when Jesus said, follow me, basically what he was saying was leave your family, leave your job, leave your home, leave your community, leave all the people who love you and follow me. And they did it. So say what you want to say about them. They left everything they knew to follow this man from Galilee. They left their homes, everything. They would have done anything for Jesus. And now when they're facing the biggest storm of their lives, now when they need Jesus the most, he has the audacity to be sleeping. Just like the disciples, many of us also feel as though Jesus is not concerned about the storms we are facing. We sometimes feel like Jesus is sleeping at the times when we need him most. And some of us are angry. Some of us feel frustrated and hurt because we've been giving our all to the service of God. We come to church every Sunday. We pay our tithes. We try to answer our phones when Pastor Maria calls. Sometimes we don't, but for the most part, we do. We are giving our all. We're doing the best we can. I stopped smoking. I gave up cursing. And you know that thing on the side? I gave that up too. And here I am, facing the biggest storm of my life. After all of the sacrifices I have made, after everything that I've done to get my life on track, Jesus has the audacity to be sleeping at the time when I need him most. Where was Jesus when my brother died? Where was Jesus when I lost my job? Where was Jesus when my marriage was falling apart? I cried out to him. Where was he? Where was Jesus when I was down to my last dime and I didn't know where to turn? Where was Jesus? Where was Jesus when the doctor told me that there was nothing else he could do? Where was Jesus? I prayed before I went into the office, so where was he? Where was Jesus when my friends turned their backs on me? Some of us have asked these questions, and if we're honest, many of us are asking them today. Some of us are in the middle of a storm. It's wet. It's cold. You're running in circles. You're doing everything you know how to do. You're trying to hold on with everything that you have. But you feel so alone. It feels as if Jesus is sleeping and you're fighting this storm by yourself. I know what it feels like because I've been there. But here's the good news. And this isn't anything theologically profound. Here's the good news. Despite what it feels like, Jesus is on the boat. Despite what it feels like, Jesus is on the boat. Let me bring it a little closer to home. Despite what it feels like, Jesus is in the hospital room. Despite what it feels like, Jesus was right there with you when they let you go. Despite what it feels like, Jesus is right in the midst of the conflict and the chaos. Despite what it feels like, Jesus is on the boat. Check this out. He may be still in the storm, but he's still in the storm. He may be still, but he's still in the storm. Jesus never promised that this road would be easy. He never promised that we wouldn't hurt and feel anger and be disappointed. He never promised that, but what he did promise was presence. Time and time again, Jesus reminds us that he will never leave us nor forsake us. And see, we sometimes want Jesus to act like us. See, we are running around crazy trying to fix everything. We can't find Jesus because Jesus is still. But you know how you can find Jesus? Be still. Be still. Jesus isn't going to come in and do what we want him to do the way we want him to do it. Be still. And you'll find God. The disciples were afraid because they forgot what they learned. They were afraid because they forgot that Jesus was on the boat. And then last, but certainly not least, the disciples were afraid because they forgot what Jesus said. You see, if we were to go back to the first part of this text, verse 35. Now, you all know I don't ever preach from a Bible, but just so you know I'm telling the truth, I'm going to pull it out because I don't want you all to think that I'm making it up. I'm going to go right back to Mark, the 4th chapter, verse 35. Listen to what Jesus tells his disciples. This Bible hasn't been used because the pages are sticking. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." At the beginning of this journey, Jesus tells his disciples that they were going to go to the other side. You see, I don't know what the disciples had planned, but Jesus' plan from the very beginning was to get to the other side. Do I gotta come and get y'all? Now, he didn't promise. Nothing in that text says that this was going to be storm-free. He never promised the winds wouldn't blow or the boat wouldn't rock or the waves wouldn't roar. But what he did say was that they were going to go to the other side. You see, but in the midst of the storm, the disciples must have lost sight of what Jesus said to them, because if they had remembered what Jesus told them from the very beginning, they wouldn't have been afraid. All they had to do was believe that they were going to make it to the other side. Just like the disciples, we too have been recruited to go on this journey with Jesus. Now, when we started this journey, Jesus never promised that it would be storm-free. He never promised that the winds wouldn't blow. But what he did say, he said, "Anita, we're going to go to the other side." He said, "Bill, come on. We're going to go to the other side. Nikki, get on this boat because we're about to go to the other side. Come on, Karen, you too. We're about to go to the other side." He didn't say that it was going to be problem-free. He didn't say that we weren't going to encounter challenges and problems and issues and obstacles. All he said was that we're going to go to the other side. So here we are in our boats, right? We're holding on to the promises of God. But the storms of life are raging, and we're trying to hold on. Well, I want to encourage you this morning. I know that the winds and the waves are blowing and roaring, but the good news is this. Check this out. The good news is this. Jesus says that we're going to go to the other side, which means that this storm isn't going to keep me from the other side. I can go through this storm, and I know I'm afraid, but I can go through it fearless, knowing that I'm going to make it to the other side. If I believe what Jesus said, I can stand on the fact that nothing is going to keep me from the other side. Let me come and get you. Sickness isn't going to keep you from the other side. Unemployment isn't going to keep you from the other side. Divorce can't keep you from the other side. Disappointment can't keep you from the other side. Heartbreak can't keep you from the other side. There is no storm big enough. There is nothing bad enough that is going to keep you from the other side. As you face your storm this morning, I want you to face it knowing that there is nothing that's going to take you out. Why? Because we serve a God who promised that we were going to make it to the other side. So whatever you're going through on your job, it's okay, because it's not going to keep you from the other side. Whatever the doctor tells you, okay, it's not going to keep me from the other side. My financial situation, not what I want it to be, but guess what? It's not going to keep me from the other side. Do I have anybody in the house today standing on the promises of God? Do I have anybody in the house today declaring that I am not going to be afraid? I'm going to walk through life with my head held high because I serve a God who told me I'm going to make it to the other side. I know that things are not working right now, but I'm going to make it to the other side. I know the storms are raging, and I know it's hard not to fear. I get scared too sometimes, but I believe in a God who said that he will never leave me nor forsake me. And when I'm struggling and when life is shaking me, I get real still, y'all. I get real still because I want to connect to God. And I believe that God is going to speak to every storm in my life and say, peace, be still. That's the God we serve. Why are you afraid? Because you forgot. Here is your call to remember. Remember that you are not alone. Remember that Jesus is on your boat. Remember what God promised. You are not alone. In Jesus' name, amen.